So, welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mazzocchioo 4, Mazzocchioo Talks session number 4. Um, we are very pleased today to have Architecturebrio as a guest, and especially Robert Verrijt. I just want to say a few words about to present our speaker, our guest. We have met I think it's almost half a year ago, 6 months ago, when in the context of the Venice Biennale of Architecture, we extended the invitation to contribute with a text to our pavilion in Venice, the Romanian pavilion, on the theme of architecture of migration and architecture and the city. And from that point, we started to have chat and talk and debate on the subject of various societies and how architecture and the city can react and can influence our way of life. And we were very happy to have this possibility to exchange ideas. Robert and Shefali Balvani, they are part of, they have formed Architecturebrio. I think in 2006, if I am mistaken, Robert, please intervene and correct me. Yes. You come from Netherlands, and in 2006 you decided to move to Mumbai, and I have seen on your website that you have been interested in the architecture of of Geoffrey Bavas, who is an extraordinary architect. I have discovered him briefly recently, grace to your mentioning him on your website, and it's an extraordinary reference for us.
Yeah, some of his work, so you all can familiarize yourself with him. Yeah.
Yes, and in the meantime, Shefali, who is your partner, has been close to Rahul Mehrotra, who is another great figure and important personality in architecture and the city in India. But I think he's more influential than just that part of the world. And I want to say that I have discovered you, Grace, to your houses which you have built. I have seen them online on various websites, and then I got curious, and I entered on your website, and then I looked with attention to the beautiful details, spaces, and to the way in which you responded to what I imagine, because I haven't visited India, is that local context. So, in the context of our project at the University of Architecture Ion Mincu, we have asked you to be a guest speaker, and later on, at the end of the first 6 weeks, to be part of a jury in our studio, and now to present your work to the students and professors of our university who are here. And I thank you. I thank everybody for your attendance to this Mazzocchioo talk. I would like also just a brief word to say that about the new normality. I will ask everybody to have their microphones off, and if possible, the cameras on, to have this interaction feeling as good as possible. And if during the presentation of Robert you could you want to ask questions, please drop them, please ask them in the chat area of this meeting. And later on at the end, I will read those questions, and we can have a question and answer moment. Also, if Robert, you want to have interruptions or debates or small talks in between, please tell us. So,
yeah, I'd be happy to. Even in between the lecture, if you want to interrupt me, that's perfectly fine, because then we can have a good conversation.
yes, but I'm asking you, I'm asking you all if you can do that by writing the questions down, so that we will have order during
Yes.
this presentation. So,
Yes.
Robert, please have you have the floor.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Stefan. It's really a pleasure to share our work with you all in Bucharest. And of course, Stefan has already introduced me to some of the activities at your university. And since most of you are studying at the moment the architecture and typological continuities and transformations in various times and places, I hope we can add a bit to this diversity and variety. But before I proceed, I'd like to talk a bit about our roots and our journey to where we are now today, talking to all of you. Because like life, our journey in the world of architecture has been mostly circumstantial and at the same time full of surprises and coincidences. But it has also been one with a particular direction. I grew up in a tiny village called Mareze, which you see the picture of here, with a beautiful church, very picturesque, in the south of the Netherlands. It was a place that was very quiet and also therefore often a little boring. So I moved away as soon as I was able to study. I studied in Delft at the architecture school. And this was during a time when super Dutch architecture was raging across the world. And it was an interesting period because architecture started questioning conventional briefs and programs and propose alternatives. And by layering and recomposing program in different ways, new typologies emerged that were either commentaries on society or proposed alternative futures. And it had the ambition to deal with some of the critical challenges of the time. However, the strong emphasis on the clarity of the concept also resulted in what I would think is a loss of the experiential and the physical quality of architecture. And architecture lost its relation to the process of making. You know, about a building rather resembled exactly what a blue foam model looked like, then emerging out of the logic of constructing, and often became the unnecessary focus of attention. So I wouldn't say that this led me to escape the Netherlands, but I was definitely interested in looking for inspiring places elsewhere. And during my studies, I had gone for an exchange program to CEPT, a school of architecture in Ahmedabad in India, the university that was founded by Pritzker Prize-winning architect B.V. Doshi. And Shefali, my partner, graduated from there. And while in Delft as a student, you were kind of left alone to chart out your own path and explore your own interests. The direct teacher and student experience still existed in this school. And it was really a place where you kind of learned from your gurus, as we say in India. And here, architecture was taught that was contextually spirited, environmentally informed, and structuralist and modernist at heart. But it was also a place that was on the edge of being dogmatic due to its close-knit teaching and learning culture. And while looking for a place where architecture did emphasize on experience and materiality, an architecture that, instead of calling out for attention, would search for a continuity, we chose to work in Sri Lanka, in the studio of Jana Daswata, to get a closer understanding of Jeffrey Baba's work, an architect who we really admired. And this is one of Baba's works. And what you can see is that it seemed to not impose itself on the surrounding, but instead do the opposite. because the untamed wildness of Sri Lankan tropical nature instead determined his architecture in its conceptualization and then overtake and dominate it in reality. I initially came to Sri Lanka to work on a retrospective exhibition of Baba's work at the Dam in Frankfurt, Germany. And this involved working on several models of his buildings, which strangely, you know, a lot of the buildings by Baba didn't even have any drawings, let alone models. And we worked then on extensions and refurbishments of some of his seminal projects. This is one who we built while we were there. But you know, being able to closely study and experience Baba's work, we were very influenced by its sort of apparent naturalness and simplicity. But it was also interesting to observe that this simplicity was actually the result of surprisingly intensive interventions. The Kandalama Hotel, for example, that you see here was built in the 1980s, and it is the highlight of architecture playing the disappearing act. But behind the soft blanket of creepers and lianas and expansive rooftop lawns, there lies a very straightforward and utilitarian scheme. And the columns and the beams of the structural scheme are violently anchored into the rock surfaces of the forest that it sits in. The framework twists and turns here and there to accommodate itself and create experiential interest. But in no way does architecture stop being geometric, defined by man-made logic and measurement systems. And on the other hand, in no way does nature, although maybe helped along its way by the human hand, stop doing what it does best. It adapts, evolves, improvises, and surprises. The Lunaganga garden that you see here is, of course, one of the masterpieces by Baba. More so because it's not about buildings here. The garden is about light, skill, proportion, and time. Of course, all architectural concepts. But you know, the garden has grown without a plan, following the principles of action gardening, named after action painting, where the painter throws his colors at the canvas from a great distance. But we always wondered about this paddy field garden near the lake. There's some people who have some mics on. Maybe you can mute yourself.
If everybody could please turn their microphones off. Thank you.
Yeah. So we visited once after a heavy downpour. And what happened, you know, usually the concrete checkerboard pattern laid in between the grass that you see here, it flooded. And now lake and the garden and architecture all collapsed into one. Baba's obsession with laying down geometries into the landscape resonated those inside the estate bungalow that you see in this photo. And he did not subjugate nature to the will of man, but in a way transformed our experience of nature by creating a contrast that only highlights the rawness and unpredictability of nature. Apart from one of his last projects, the Marissa house that you see here on the screen, Baba's work relies heavily on vernacular typologies and construction methods. And while the relationships with the land were extremely innovative and always surprising, typologies and spatial configurations were often not, and construction techniques neither. And Baba was not really interested in architecture being a product of conceptual thinking. So in 2006, we moved to Mumbai to start our own practice. And we were kind of looking to practice an architecture that combined the primacy of context as the essential generator of built form, resonating with our learnings in Sri Lanka, with a conceptual framework innovating with building typologies to address the challenges of our time. And this is where we work now since around 14 years. And our office team size ranges between 15 to 20 people. You see here a kind of noisy Indian street on the outside, lots of traffic, and then a serene calmness on the inside. And then a buffer of bamboos and banana plants in between. And here's our workshop. And you know, what I think is one of the most attractive aspects of working here in India is the immense variety of conditions you can expose yourself to. But a place like, for example, the Netherlands has been so far spared of the reality of the globalized world with its increasing peaks and valleys of wealth concentration. In India, we deal with extremes in economic status of our clients. And this, of course, makes you have to constantly adapt and switch positions and negotiate. But exposing yourself to diverse situations gives you the opportunity to build relationships and weave stories between them. It makes you flexible and it makes you agile. But it also means that one day you find yourself arguing with a wealthy client about which exact double door fridge to purchase, while in the next meeting you're kind of struggling to find solutions to build an entire house at the same cost of that fridge. And to add to that diversity of work fields, we have recently started an office in Rotterdam, another harbor city. That's where I'm at the moment. Globalism tends to homogenize, but it also polarizes. And in our contemporary experience, our world feels increasingly disparate due to the increasingly connectedness of even the most remote places. And we therefore encourage to embrace this pluralism in our practice with all the inherent contradictions. So I'm going to take you now to this variety of conditions through the lens of three topics: practice, typology, and lastly, material culture. And rather than talking about them as autonomous projects, we're really trying to embed them within the intricate web of circumstances that they are rooted in, starting with a story that germinated on a playground. Our first project was commissioned by the organization Magic Bus. And they realized that children in the city were the worst affected by the scarcity of space due to the startling densities in Indian cities. And what started out with some ad hoc sports, coaching and mentoring by the founder Matthew Spacey, it became a nationwide program. The boys and the girls in the program learned discipline and improved self-esteem, hygiene, and the benefits of working in a team in a healthy, competitive environment. The first phase of this outdoor learning center for this NGO was designed by Rahul Malhotra, where Shefali had worked on the design on the campus while she was working there. And when we returned to Mumbai, the client reached out to us to design the second phase of the campus, starting out with a master plan. And we held several workshops with the stakeholders and interviewed the users of the campus to understand how it was functioning and what was needed to make optimal use of its existing resources. It was a great learning to really go back to a project which Shefali had helped designing earlier and learn from both its achievements and its mistakes. And what emerged, for example, was that for the children visiting the campus, there was a need for more shaded spaces where they could play and learn during the hot summer months and the rainy monsoon months. So what we designed was a composite of two programs, kind of partly a building and partly a challenge course. An interactive building used as a gathering space and play area. And we located the pavilion over here on a confluence of four important landscape elements. on the confluence, and I hope, yeah, I don't know if you can see my mouse. I can't see my own mouse, but on the right is small hill.
Cannot see the mouse because
can't
you're in
see
full
it.
screen, I think. That's why.
Yeah, right. So on the right top, then is the left top, small hill, and a stream running through, and a play field on the south, and a river on the top right. And these elements are emphasized by strategically placing the various activities of the learning pavilion on either side of the banks of the stream. And then the roof straddles across these different landscapes, tying them together. The learning pavilion is a building with the purpose of, in abstract terms, educating children about overcoming challenges in life. And overcoming boundaries, an extension of the existing challenge course on the campus. And children learn to work with each other in teams to achieve goals. The space below the roof is open to all sides, and in the summer months, that means that the shade of the roof creates a respite from the heat. And a natural breeze flows from the river and cools the covered spaces during the summer, during the monsoon months. During these rains, the pavilion really becomes like a dry space to take cover from heavy rains, and the stream below becomes alive. Now, often children's play spaces are associated with bright colors, but here we wanted to emphasize on the experience of the natural environment. The classroom becomes the outdoors, and nature becomes the classroom. Well, the Learning Pavilion was a project that resulted out of a more, you could say, traditional model of a client-led architectural commission. The next project is the result of a self-initiated practice. You know, we realized that when it comes to the quality of life of ordinary citizens, we as architects in a city like Mumbai had become irrelevant. For example, in this housing estate that you see, you can see the gaps of the buildings between the buildings are literally 3 meters. This housing estate was meant to improve the living conditions of slum dwellers who used to live here before. And the architect is then an agent of the twisted bylaws, and to be honest, has no other option but to be that agent. And these are the conditions that architects are engaging in, and of course lose credibility in the meantime. And I think if we want to regain a position of relevance, we need to push ourselves to redefine our ways of operating. How can architects transform themselves from merely competent executors of assignments into entrepreneurs and producers? We can't only wait for clients to call us. And instead, can we create demands and opportunities? Here we collaborated with an NGO called Billion Bricks and set up a dedicated design studio within our office to address the urgent issue of homelessness in India and the world. And this with one very clear mantra: never design poorly for the poor. Now, this is a picture of a typical village in India. It's under perpetual construction, perpetual disrepair, and beleaguered by overcrowding. And trying to think through this problem of the lack of adequate housing, we started thinking on a much larger scale, looking at the massive shortage of housing that exists around the world. Now, the problem is daunting. 1 billion people do not have adequate housing, and this figure will double by 2030. And 650 million of those are homeless people that live in rural areas. And then 85% of them do not have access to financing to build a home. Now in India alone, there is a deficit of 40 million rural homes. And now this is an example of what the government thinks will be the solution. Just build enough concrete boxes of the minimum size and then subsidize the construction somehow. But of course, this goal is impossible to reach. Just think about that number, 40 million. However, even if we manage to solve this complicated puzzle of housing, straddling financing, access to land, and resolving an unimaginable material supply chains to build those homes, we create one more major problem. Is how do we supply electricity to all these homes? We calculated it would require 5 new large coal power plants requiring $10 billion of investment. And worse, it requires 370 railroad cars of coal per day to supply those homes of energy. Of course, this way India would not meet even the Paris climate targets. So what about solar farms then? Well, we calculated we would need about 50,000 football fields for that, in addition to the 500,000 football fields that the houses would need. So why not combine these challenges and really build homes underneath solar farms? Because when we see a solar farm like this, we see 3 roofs waiting to be inhabited. So with Verrijt, we do solve one more major problem of housing, because who would finance building those 40 million homes in India? The government doesn't have the funds to actually build them. And rural families like those don't have access to financing because they have no collateral. But now in this project, the solar roof is a collateral, and the energy produced by the solar panels provides 25 times more than the house needs. So how does it work? Well, 95% excess electricity gets sold on the market and then pays back the investment over an 18-year period towards the construction of the homes. And we designed a prefabricated building system that can be built quickly and with minimal means. And 40% of that material is prefabricated to ensure the speedy and cost-efficient high-quality construction. And another 40% of the construction allows adaptation to local climates and contexts, such as the plinth and slab and info walls and doors and windows. And the remaining 20% are off-the-shelf products like water tanks, pumps, and toilets that can be procured locally. So here we imagined what it could look like, for example, in the Rajasthani desert, or on the plains of the Ganges in central India, where brick is in abundance, or here in tropical Kerala, or in the cold climate of Ladakh. Now, this is an aerial picture of a village called Mazzocchioo, which is 300 kilometers east of Mumbai, where the first prototype is built. And like almost all rural sites, access and distance to a big city with large construction equipment, like you see here in this example in New York, is a major challenge. So this kind of high-tech solution would be ridiculously inappropriate. But prefabrication is paramount to build at speed and quality. So we had to kind of reinvent this idea of prefabrication. And we needed to miniaturize the prefab elements so that they could be assembled without the need of a crane. The support structure is made of prefab concrete blocks that get bolted together with nuts and bolts on site. And we developed a column system that consists out of small blocks that weigh less than 20 kilograms each and therefore easy to carry. And the concrete, it acts as a mass. And then a central rod that you see here that is screwed to tighten the blocks together takes all the tension. And if any of you still remember those little push-up toys, it works exactly like that, the structural system. And here we tested the ease of assembly of the system. In one day, all 8 columns were erected. And then a connector plate that you see here gets screwed on a female joint, and it tightens and compresses the concrete blocks. And then in half a day, the steel roof structure was placed on the top of these columns to brace them. And then here you see the installation of the solar roof. And then here the completed prototype house in the village context. Now, this project has a huge potential to scale up and reach a much larger number of communities around the world. But what I think is most special about this project is that families in Verrijt will become the kind of the pioneers towards a sustainable future. And they will actually live in a house that is more future ready than the houses that we all live in. So here are a few more photographs of the prototype in Aurangabad. Apart from generating power, the house also harvests its rainwater. You see the rain chain coming down, and it treats its own sewage water through the reed belt filter that you see below. Now, this is another prototype of Verrijt that we built as a community center in the Philippines. And it is the only structure that has power in this neighborhood. And as you can see in the middle of that table, it doesn't only generate income, but it also becomes a giant charging station for batteries and mobile phones for all these people living in this community. And now we're working actually on scaling this up to the level of communities of around 125 homes, which produce together 2.5 megawatt of power. If anyone has a question already, please feel free to ask.
There are no questions written so far, but okay. I'm sure they will appear at the end.
Can I ask something?
Yes, please. Robert, this is Christy, one of my colleagues from our studio.
Okay.
Hey, hello, Robert. I wanted to ask you, what is your relationship regarding these projects with local authorities? Was this a private enterprise, or did they support you to do this? And if it is so, what's the plan for scaling this up? Or is there a plan?
Yeah. So the prototype that we built is actually in collaboration with an organization in the village and the local, well, we call it panchayat members. They are the village heads of the village. There's just about 100 people living in the village, and this panchayat, in consultation with this with the village members, decided actually who was allowed to get this first prototype house in the village. But with scaling this project up, like an example that I shared in the Philippines, we're actually working with a variety of stakeholders. And of course, a project like this involves then multiple stakeholders, because it then ranges from the Ministry of Power to energy companies who actually purchase the power, but also the local municipality who actually then allocates lands. And in the Philippines, it is the case that there's the Philippines is often struck by natural disasters, and you can actually see in this photograph, this is a sort of a delta near Manila, and this is land that is very low lying and is very prone to flooding. So often people have to actually be relocated to new areas and get new homes, and these then become possible places where we build those communities. So let me move on. You know, our projects are located across an extreme range of locales and cultures. What interests us most is to understand really in each particular place and time, which approach to an architecture can have a significant impact on the way we deal with our natural and built environments, and which approach is appropriate. Which typologies and precedents could inform the process? And if buildings are chameleons, do they merge, assert themselves, or do they disappear within the landscape? You know, it's a question of the cave or the boulder, a carving or sculpting, or subtraction or addition. And for us, it's important to study typologies and precedents, not to repeat them, but to kind of imagine alternatives. And appropriateness is the key word. But I do want to put a side note here, because appropriateness can lead to unwanted self-censorship. And it is not always necessary that the most self-evident solution is indeed appropriate. If appropriateness gets associated with that which is culturally acceptable, or with a nostalgic rootedness, it leads to cultural stagnation, and it leads to cliches. And the most self-evident solutions are not necessarily always indeed appropriate. It's often an inherent conflict, we feel, between the context and climate of a project and its chosen typological and functional approach that generates solutions that are unconventional and unexpectedly turn out to be favorable solutions. So how do we avoid the devastation of a rural landscape by urbanization? How do we deal with this landscape, the home of farmers over centuries, but now the playground of urban citizens? Here in the Western Ghats of India, kind of east towards the city of Mumbai, is located one of our sites. And here from the hills, numerous rivers and streams find their way down through an undulating landscape, eventually feeding into the Bombay Bay. And we asked ourselves, will we be able to create different relationships between the new settlers and this rural landscape? Can the building be made barely visible? And here, the roof of the house settles just below the top of the hillock. It camouflages itself in the silhouette of the undulating landscape. But it also sits just high enough to be able to measure oneself against the landscape and the winding river and mountain range in the distance. This house is a combination of several typologies. It's an underground house, a courtyard house, a veranda house, and a lookout post. And the climate here is unforgiving. Apart from the short winter, it's either scorching hot and dry, or the rain drops down from the sky with tremendous destructive power. And what you see gazing down from the top of the hill is just a cover of green. And now, of course, it looks very natural, as if it's always been like this. But building a house inside a hill has obviously involved quite a bit of groundwork, cutting and filling of land and destroying a part of nature in the process. One may question whether this is appropriate, but we felt that the long-term benefits of this are high. An underground house is kept naturally cool. It reduces the requirement for cooling energy, and nature is allowed to take over after completion and offsets this temporary disturbance. A courtyard in the center forges a connection with the roof and then travels through the interior of the house, extending past the pool onto the landscape. And it kind of ties together terrain and architecture through an experiential movement. Here in plan, we've highlighted here the the spaces that are most experienced, the ones that are following an architectural route in white, and they get highlighted by emphasizing on the black marked spaces that are the sort of the servant spaces. The sequence of rock carved courtyards and kitchen and dining room, veranda, screen, deck, and then the pool, and then the riparian landscape is an experiential one. But it also acts as an instrument to measure oneself against the vastness of space. The natural landscape changes from a densely bright and green colored jungle-like forest during the monsoon months to a more pale brown shrubby wasteland during the dry and hot summer months. And the plantation of drought-tolerant fountain grasses mitigates this transition to a dry landscape in the summer months. The veranda is an essential element of life in this climate. And the bamboo screen acts as a filter, but it also creates a sense of privacy. The building is made to age and weather. There's something sublime about this dramatic collision between the order of geometry and the unpredictability of nature. At the intersection of both, there's a sort of a choreographed ruin or decay, and it meditates upon the inevitability of time and the forces of nature, within which one can find both joy and comfort. This next project, The House on the Stream, questions the conventional building typology, in this case that of a house in a pastoral landscape. Here it has become one house built as two houses, with a landscape in between. A landscape that changes from a rocky, dry stream bed in the dry season to a violent and turbulent monsoon stream. This stream, although seasonal, is in this project the central element around which everything revolves. And by breaking up the house in two parts and scattering it across the site, the stream becomes omnipresent. And the bridge and the pergola that connects the two houses stimulates oneself to move out of the comfort zone of the interior and experience the outside. The pool here acts as an extension of the stream, and in this summer months, it's a substitute for it. The outside and the inside shells are distinctly different, and internal spaces are defined with volumes created by changing the thickness of the internal ceiling. And we achieve this by the use of poché, which describes the space inside walls and ceilings, the space between the inner and the outer shell. And of course, here it's part of the drawing technique as well that we showed earlier in the plan, here in section. Of course, this approach is completely contradicted to its otherwise modernist spirit. But the exterior form responds to the relationship of the building to the site elements. However, we felt that this had to be modified on the inside to get the desired spatial relationship and experiential flow of the interior spaces. Here, the plan, you can see that spaces overlap, and there's a constant shift in symmetries in the different rooms, and that contributes to a dynamic spatial experience of discovery. And you have the heaviness of the exterior concrete mass, which is reversed by the lightness of the whitewashed walls and ceilings. And then there are large sliding doors which span from floor to ceiling and wall to wall that bring in the outside in the interiors. And architecture is delicately balancing on a reduced footprint, almost as this found boulder in the landscape. That is a reference you see here in this amazing dreamlike landscape of Hampi in South India. The The homogeneous materialization emphasizes the sculptural quality of the house that is molding itself about the site. And by lifting up the tips of the wings of the ground, the relationship with the landscape is paradoxically strengthened. Here, the contradiction between architecture and nature is highlighted. And the pleasure of the building does not lie in denial, but rather in the celebration of the collision of the two. And concrete, a material that is solidified, shaped by the textures of its contraform, has a beautiful poetic quality. But it also kind of felt like a sin, because the high embodied energy of concrete is certainly not very sustainable. On the other hand, building in such a timeless manner could last a century. But building our first house with this material made us more acutely aware of some of the challenges in India. Now, this project, which is a small house, took 3 years to build. And it took so long, partly because we couldn't source the right sand of our exposed concrete. All the sand that was available locally was mined in creeks and rivers, and was saline and full of silts. And you see, this is an example of where the sand mining is happening. You see in the distance the city marching on. And you see that the requirement for raw materials devastates the surrounding landscape. And large-scale sand mining, for example, is banned in many states in India due to the abuse of mining licenses. And therefore, because of the shortage, out of desperation, miners resort to illegal forms of sand mining. And then young men have to dive to the bottom of the polluted river to fill their buckets literally with sand, which are then lifted up into boats by the people standing there. And then they get offloaded on shore. It's of course a dangerous profession, and this practice reportedly resulted into 26 deaths last year. But you can see here the desperation that becomes even more evident in this photograph, where bullock carts are used to actually remove sand from the beaches around Mumbai, eroding the coastline. Then you have a substitute for sand. There are alternative industries that are developed to crush stone into sand particles, which then in turn leave large gaps in the hills around the city. Okay, so if we avoid concrete, what about using bricks? Well, that's highly problematic, because for the insatiable requirement of fired clay bricks, there's actually fertile farmland that is converted to brick kilns. And then you get this, where the land surrounding trees is cut away, eventually killing the trees and leaving fertile lands follow. But brick kilns are not only destroying fertile topsoil, they also emit black carbon and pollute the air. Now, architecture is not defined by a singular preference of materials, because we live in an age of scarcity, a depletion of material resources and skilled labor. The architecture industry is of course deeply responsible in making the situation worse, causing ecological degradation that results from mass extraction of materials. So how do we as architects respond to this? How do we take responsibility? And how do we, for example, empower people at a local level to change their environments and become self-sufficient and work towards a more just and resilient future? What building materials, for example, leave a smaller footprint? Now, going back to 2006, this was actually our first project at the Magic Bus campus that I spoke about in the first project. And it was for a dormitory. And it was completely designed in structural bamboo. But the project failed. It was too early for this in India. The bamboo building industry was immature, and the client really couldn't take the risks, and then the project got shelved. But since then, we've started introducing bamboo in projects wherever we can, like in the screen in the riparian house we just saw. And now in the artist retreat in Mumbai. Now, in this project, there was one more major concern. How do we deal with land that is in coastal areas, considering the threat? And as we see more and more, even in Mumbai, the reality of rising sea levels. You can see Mumbai here, this sort of peninsula on the top of the photo, and then the site of this project over here on the other side of the bay. Well, you know, on one hand, we could, of course, say, let's just avoid building near the coast, right? Let's not build in this site. But coastal areas are naturally some of the most desirable places to settle, either because of the livelihood or because of the environmental qualities. But can you deal instead differently with the land? And can we build in climate resilience or use building methods that have less impact on fragile ecosystems, as well as are future ready and could accommodate rising sea levels? Now, we started this project with digging a water harvesting pond. It actually replenishes the groundwater table with sweet water in the monsoon, and then prevents the site from turning saline in the dry season. You see here on the right a series of pavilions and cabins and workshops placed orthogonally in the grid of the palm tree plantation, with the geometry of the pond as a contrast. And next to this pond, we propose a workshop building. And the plan is really simple. There are two roofs that are defined merely by rows of columns. And then there are two chopped off pyramid-shaped roofs with two skylights that are shifted away from each other, and they define these two spaces experientially. Now, this typology is loosely based on this Ambalama in Sri Lanka. It's to me one of the most beautiful public infrastructure projects, if you call it like that, of the early 19th century. It's sited on a modest rock outcrop, an island amongst a sea of paddy fields. And pilgrims, traders and travelers from all over South Asia gathered in these sort of rest stops to rest, meet, and share stories with each other. Now, the structure delicately balances on 4 boulders of around 800 millimeters to 1 meter in size. And the height of the boulders carefully levels the difference between this one at the slope of the rock surface and then the horizontal plane. And then there are 4 large rectangular shaped tree trunks that are overlaying like a puzzle piece into each other to form the support of the superstructure. As well, it functions as a bench to sit on or sleep on. Space, functionality, and tectonics and materialization and structural essence all converge here. It is heavy and down to earth, but transparent and light at the same time. The spatial quality of this emblem is one of continuity, while being anchored and rooted to its specific location. Now, typology is not only a formal abstract structure. It is also deeply connected to reality and rooted in social hierarchies and traditions, relationships. And introducing this type into a very different context, like we did here, therefore also kind of disrupts and destroys these relationships. But we believe through this disruption, it also invokes new connections and generates new stories. The modernists in India introduced universal types to destabilize and enforce change with a universal truth. And then in the Indian generation of regional modernists, like, for example, Doshi and Korea, they used typology to establish a continuity with the past and tradition that was disrupted by colonialism. And we like to transform typologies to establish relationships of continuity with the locale, but also to address the realities and challenges of a rapidly changing world. So here you see the plan of the artist workshop. It's a 12 by 9 meter sort of tropical shed in a grid of 1.5 meters with a 6 meter high roof. And with the stilts, columns and beams, they are made in galvanized steel. The roof structure is built of bamboo V-shaped rafters, which are covered by a lightweight sandwich roof. And then a solar skylight on top of the roof that pulls up hot air from the space below and encourages a natural flow of air across the workshop. The skylight brings in light, but it also, of course, generates power. And the otherwise distracting solar panels are integrated into the roof design. Now, because regulations don't actually allow us to build permanent structures near the coast, and to reduce the impact of these structures on the site, the steel components are completely manufactured off-site. Hereafter, they are assembled with nut and bolt connections on site, allowing them to be dis- and reassembled elsewhere. You see here the bolted connections, and the structure is placed on these large stone boulders, and they form the foundation of the structure. Now, bamboo is a wonderful material, but to be honest, it also frustrates a lot of architects because it's never straight, right? And it varies in diameter between the bottom and the top. And I'm showing this image from the type of bamboo we get in the local market in Mumbai. It's not not at all dissimilar to the kind of solid and straight bamboo you get in, for example, Bali or Vietnam. But we did want to use local bamboo instead of importing it from Indonesia. And neither did we have the luxury to afford a rigid selection process. So we worked with these crooked and uneven bamboos we got locally. But the diagonal zigzag layout of the rafters avoids the irregularity from becoming destructive, but it also actually forms a stronger structural shell. On the right, you see a detail of how the bamboo is tied to the cement board shell. And then the ends of the bamboos are tied with a coconut rope to prevent it from splitting. And then here you see how the whole structure comes together. And here you see how light keeps changing, animating the space throughout the day and the night. Now, I think I'm kind of running slowly out of time, so I'm just going to skip one project.
You have time, as you wish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know, this I'll show one more project. This last project, what we did is we kind of asked ourselves, you see this amazing photographs of this pristine natural landscape, but how do you actually build here? And people have an inherent yearning to retreat to those kind of undisturbed parts of the planet. And as urbanization intensifies and a feeling of isolation from the natural world grows, our desire for a place away from the life in the city increases, a place in the wild. And we continue to do so while we know that the world actually does no longer exist, because the last bits of the world have already been explored. Apart maybe from the deep oceans, every place has been already visited, seen, and documented. You see written about or written on, and of course Instagrams. And this picture became the icon for the rising popularity for remote, inaccessible places last year. It shows a traffic jam on one of the most difficult to reach places in the world, Mount Everest. But like this, would you still want to climb Mount Everest? Or would you rather look for less traveled, less popular, more remote places and then spoil those as well? Now, here's this dilemma that every architect faces when starting working on a new site. Should one not leave the site alone? Why touch it and why spoil it? I think the problem with this, though, is that if we believe, as William Cronon puts it in The Trouble with Wilderness, that nature is where we are not, we give ourselves permission to evade the responsibilities for the lives we actually lead in our urban environments. Because if we designate the wild places as sacred, we kind of in a way also say that our backyards, maybe our roadside trees or our neighborhood parks, are not valuable. Now, I would like to step back for a minute and elaborate a bit more in detail what we mean when we use the words nature and landscape. And firstly, I would like to establish that when we say nature, it is not actually what you would presume it to be, raw, untouched nature. In fact, as Simon Sharma elaborates in his book Landscape and Memory, there's no word for raw, untouched, unseen nature. It does not, and it cannot exist. Because as soon as the human eye lays its eyes on it, that which is raw is immediately transformed to a landscape, framed as well as in a painting in a museum. One could say that nature is as ephemeral as Eurydice, because seeing nature immediately implies that it vanishes. It becomes cultured and created. Landscapes are culture before they are nature. They are constructs of the imagination projected onto wood and water and rock. And what you see with your eyes is defined by what your parents, your great-grandparents, romantic poets in the 18th century, and the first Homo sapiens planting a seed and starting the agricultural revolution saw in nature. It is their fears and their adoration of the sublime and their greed that filters your gaze. Still, however, we are attracted to those pockets of landscapes that seem close to what we imagine wilderness would have looked like. And we want to inhabit those places. And we want to explore them. And we want, after a hard day of exploring, that there's a comfortable place for us to retreat into and wind down. So we designed a trekker's hut. Well, not this is just an inspiration, but this interest, one could of course build, on the natural rock platform on the right, but it would be much more exciting to be notionally building a cabin that hovers over the edge, seemingly off balance. And of course, additionally, more floor area in the air means less area touching and impacting the sites. Now, there isn't much room to place any habitable space here. And the weathered mica rock surfaces itself are just too beautiful to touch. And designing something so precarious required a whole different process for us. We made use of drone images to make a final selection of the site. And we then converted these images in a 3D map in the software to understand the geography better. Then I created a 3D polygonal model, generating the texture, and then here the 3D mesh. And a combination of this 3D technology and then 550 hand-cut paper sheets of exactly 0.9 mm thick, we created this model that allowed us to get a a more physical and sort of tactile sense of the topography. Now, to reduce the interference on the rock surfaces, the shape of the faceted elevations are determined by the point at which the volume hits the geography, almost like crystal-like in their own way, mimicking the rocky outcrops. The cabin has a floor area of 40 square meters, and each wing contains a different program. Now, this Y-shaped typology is not often used in architectural history. It is mostly used actually in neutral schemes that are either extremely introverted, like prisons, or in anonymous directionless apartment and office blocks with a focus on efficient circulation. However, here the typology is chosen to enable us to focus on three distinct horizons. A day room with an inbuilt sofa and tiny breakfast on the bottom right. It stares at the valley below and the projected rocks. And then on the top, on the north, a compact bathroom opens towards the immediate forest. And the bedroom that you see on the left orients towards the Himalayan mountain range. A small pantry is located in the central triangular space. And the out end and on the end of each wing contains a fireplace inside a cabinet. And all these cabinets and storage spaces are built into it to make optimum use of the space and to emphasize the framing of views. The mountain cabin offers the basic comforts of a home, while providing an rustic experience of the mountain life. In the living room wing, a loft space creates another sleeping space on top. And this mountain cabin is designed to be autarkic. All the three roofs are filled with integrated solar panels to provide its own power. And then the roofs are actually sloping inwards to the center to harvest all the rainwater, which then gets stored in the hull, below the floor, in the hull of the cabin, between the floor and the foundation. While avoiding reliance on external resources, it prevents any damaging impact on the sensitive and ecological habitat it is nestled in. Now, of course, building this is going to be a challenge. The line out alone is full of improvisations. So how do you measure two column positions with a very specific horizontal distance on a 45-degree slope with the abyss staring up at you? So we decided to do a first sort of a rough line out. So we could at least confirm whether what we observed in our digital models matched with the site conditions. And you can't just drill away in the rock to place marking posts. So each team member you see here becomes one marker. How do you build this when you don't have a stable ground to work on? So we decided that we're going to build first a platform of steel tubes and angles and working from the center outwards. And then the wall panels of the roof can be installed from this platform. The most economical material that can be carried over a forest path by people and mules is timber. So the framework is made in pine timber. And the forest this is located in is prone to forest fires. You see here, these pine trees, they have a high resin content that is harvested, but it also catches fire easily. So the cladding will actually be made of toon, which is a local cedar wood that is charred to make it fire resistant. The cabin is in a way a device to observe the dramatic and the rugged mountainscape of the Himalayas. We need to embrace nature. accept its unpredictability and uncertainty, and take it up as a challenge. In our work, architectural typologies and landscape strategies go hand in hand to enhance and anchor a building in its context. But I do hope that I've managed to show in the previous project that contextual and environmentally sensitive design does not mean that one always needs to take what one sees at face value. It does not always mean that one has to tread lightly and treat the given as sacred. With these projects, we do not attempt to domesticate nature, nor do we attempt to naturalize architecture. We search for just the right amount of confrontation and equilibrium between natural processes and architectural permanence, a stage to experience time and place. It is this duality understood within the context of a world that we feel is out of balance, and our desire to continue creating characterful, responsive and experiential and contemplative environments that keeps us exploring within ever-shifting positions, an architecture of pluralism, and contemplating on this view of the eternal snow-capped peaks, which we actually don't know how long they'll be like this anymore. Hopefully we'll make visitors act on these grand challenges that we will all have to face. Thank you so much for attending this talk, and I really hope you have some nice questions so we can have a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the very beautiful and very beautiful presentation, and for letting us know and see into the depth of the, what is there before the architecture comes to life. And I want to say that I am very impressed. I don't find the right words. I'm very impressed by the contradictions in the culture of India, in the beautiful places and the extraordinary tradition of Indian architecture, and also the difficult realities which you have tried to address and to tackle, especially with this very meaningful project you have shown us at the beginning of the presentation. We have had some reactions so far, but mostly saying they appreciate and they like the projects and the drawings and the structure. We invite you to write the questions here, and meanwhile I wanted to I don't know if it's a question or a thought that maybe you can comment on. I was thinking on your double culture, on your double situation. You have began the presentation with that, talking about globalization and also about polarization. But I wanted to ask you about this richness of having a double culture, coming with different references from one place to the other, and being able to maybe see the strengths and also the problematic points, which can become poetic points of departure in the projects. And I was curious, for example, to transform it into a pragmatic question: how can you, in these days, conduct the office in such a local architecture as you do in Mumbai from Rotterdam? How is that going?
Yes, it's a good question, and we don't know yet because we have just started that. But what I do think is that there are many aspects to it actually. Firstly, it's been 15 years since we've been in India, and we've traveled extensively there. I think that sort of that understanding of a place is extremely critical to add valuable and meaningful projects. But it also has a risk of perhaps becoming too much of a baggage sometimes if you sort of are too embedded and too negotiated and too sort of reliant on a particular place. And I think that's where really the advantages of the outsider's view. But there's really a fine balance that one needs to tread between the sort of the willful ignorance and not knowing and not understanding, and on the other hand, sort of the ability to look at things afresh but with a knowledge, right? And then on the other hand, I have to also just talk a little bit about more the practical aspects of even just running a practice in India, because in fact it's faster for me to travel from Mumbai to Rotterdam than it is from me to travel from Mumbai to the place that you see on the photograph right now, right? This actually takes 24 hours to get to. So it obviously means that we are not here every week or every 2 weeks to look at the progress of construction. And it actually means we are there maybe 3 or 4 times a year, me personally and my team maybe a little bit more. But that's the interesting thing that you has completely changed working in India over the last decade, where 10 to 15 years ago, a place like this was reliant on a landline, and that landline often was very irregular and cracky. And now even the rickshaw drivers or the carpenters, they all have mobile phones, smartphones. So a project that we built, and that's the other projects that we build here, most of it is all done on team WhatsApp groups, right? It's really details are transferred and communicated over photographs, and then those photographs are sketched upon and sent back to the carpenter, and then he makes a little video from the door detail that he's just making from different angles and shares it back to us, and we comment on it. So so that's the sort of change that has happened in India. Of course, very different from a building culture like in the Netherlands, where once the drawing is frozen and you've submitted it to the contractor, you have nothing to say as an architect, right? You're just you're happy if you are allowed to come and visit the site once. But the fact that you on one hand have this building culture in India, which is still very much hands-on and direct in a way with craftsmen and with skilled laborers, that you have direct access to them through communication, and that you can actually be anywhere. So whether I sit in Mumbai or in Rotterdam, it really doesn't matter.
Yes, thank you. We have 2 questions so far written here in the chat area. I'm going 3 questions long, so I'm going to ask them. So first from Tejashri Karande, please excuse me if I read your name wrong. Your work is truly inspiring. The level of thought process put into every project, right from sourcing material to its effects on the site, takes a lot of detailed research. How do you explain these things to your clients, and what are their inputs on the same?
Yeah, good question. The communication to a client for us is often as sort of open and transparent at the same time. At the same time, we realize that some information actually does not help a process, and actually maybe contradicts the smooth running of a process. So it's really, sometimes you have to sort of leave certain information for later times in the process. And sometimes it's also just really important to explain the challenges and the context in which the project actually is situated. So maybe similar to what I've done today, because often people, clients, their sort of brief to them is particularly what they need. They need 3 bedrooms and a living space and a dining space, and they may have some kind of understanding of the importance of nature and landscape. But for example, the project in Alibag, the Mumbai artist retreat, right? There, the sort of the challenges that the larger context that is there is really this challenge of what we're all going through, and that is climate change. Even last monsoon, there was actually seawater coming and flooding the site, which had never happened before, right? Earlier, it was just rainwater that flooded the site. Now, because of the differences in climate, seawater had come in. And just by sort of understanding what these projectives are for the future, and then making the client really aware of that, is what then helped us to develop a design that is based on sort of prefabrication that can be disassembled, so that when it is when maybe the site doesn't exist anymore, the building and all the energy you've put into it, design energy, but also just embodied energy of material and labor, can still be used in another place.
And do your clients understand these sustainable implications? I mean, for example, do clients?
Well, sometimes it's so sometimes they're not, right? And sometimes it's then purely even a financial consideration. Not particularly with this client, but we could have very easily argued this with the client out, saying that you're doing X amount of investment in this project, and in 10 years it's gone, right? So you better maybe invest 10% extra and make sure you can reuse it later again.
Yes. I'm going to ask now a question from Vlad and Alex, a polemic question. If nature exists where people do not, as you have poetically said, why try camouflage architecture into landscape? Who do we camouflage for?
Yeah. Good question. Yes, I think that's very interesting. Of course, maybe there are 2 parts to this question, but the second part of it, who do we camouflage for, is I think it has to do with the fact that architecture doesn't only exist for the owners or the clients, right? Architecture also exists to and becomes part of a building culture in a sort of a wider context. So, for example, this riparian house, the house on the riverfront that we sort of hidden away. For us, the clients were in a way the farmers that live on the other side of the river, and that tend their fields there, because it's on one hand, you as a client living in the house, you would like to see these beautiful fields, but if that happens from a sort of an eyesore on top of the hill, dominating its landscape, and saying, I own you, then you're not getting the reciprocal relationship that you would actually want in a site like that.
Yes, thank you. Robert, we have more questions coming into the chat area. You tell me if you have enough time to go on, please.
Yeah, sure. I have time. Yeah.
From 1+7, I don't know who that is. Yes, I think you should put your names into it, even if we are online. They say we architects often design a building, but sometimes forget to think about the landscape around. But the way you play with surrounding, taking nature inside and blurring the boundary between both works really well. It was a really great presentation. Just wanted to ask about the Artisans Retreat project. That since the whole structure is raised and seeing the context around, how is space below the floor used? The space below. Robert, I think you can also follow the text here. My reading might not be the best. Is it kept residual? How
Yeah.
does and space act throughout the season? Does it create a problem when the water collects over there?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see it here on the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
So this raised platform is purely because of the flooding on the site. And what happens in the monsoon seasons is that there's so much water that comes from the surrounding hills over the paddy fields, and then sort of collects at that lowest level, just next to the ocean. From there, it can't escape into the ocean because the ocean has a high water level. So it sort of stagnates there, and the stilts are purely to keep the floor area dry. I read another question, which was also asking about the stone boulders, right?
Mm-hmm.
They of
Yes.
course then prevent the steel from actually touching the water and touching the ground, which is helping in preventing them from corrosion. But also these boulders, they are sort of extra weights, because the weight of the building is relatively very, very little. So the challenge of the structural engineering was not so much sort of supporting the roof. It was more, how do we prevent this roof actually from lifting up in very strong winds and typhoons. So how can we tie it down? So we actually had to create extra weight, and by these boulders we created that extra weight. Yeah, so regarding the floor area below, it is an empty space. It floods. Luckily, in the monsoon season, it's continuous fresh water, so it doesn't stagnate and become a breeding ground for mosquitoes, for example. And then, as soon as the monsoon is over, the water disappears.
Thank you. We have two more questions. One from Emil, our colleague. You have met Christy. Emil is the third colleague of from our team. Emil, so if you want to intervene, please do. Thank you for the complex and inspiring presentation. How do you see the relationship between the doctrine of architecture and the moral issues of our times? It's a vast question. So
yeah, maybe Emil would like to elaborate a bit on it.
Yeah, Emil. So if you want to narrow it down and make it more approachable, or in that regard, I wanted to ask you, in Europe, in the European culture, we have this ideal that when we build something, it is forever. You know, we want to put permanence into that building by foundation materials. You know, part of the city. Is that the case also in India? Regarding this, yes, regarding this permanence, this desire of permanence of the build.
To some extent, yes, and I think this also. Well, I'm not sure if that's culturally related, but of course, India is underseeing a massive change and has been seeing this for the last 50, 60 years or so. And I think architecture helps in creating at least the sense of permanence and continuity, which may not be real, right? It may just be sort of a phantom, but architecture is able to give that, and of course that also leads to certain types of architectures that are sort of alluding to a tradition and to an architecture and to a history to prevail a lot in India as well. Very different from the kind of work that we do.
Emil, do you want to add something to that question, or?
No, thank you for rephrasing it very generously. Thank you.
Okay, because I don't want to answer for Robert, but it seems to me that you have touched upon the matter at the beginning of the presentation, and I also think that matters of sustainability and of taking into account society, as you have shown us, should maybe put into crisis our profession and our discipline, you know, and make us revisit the hardcore of our discipline, you know, in terms of elements of architecture.
Yeah, I have a problem with the word doctrine, right, of architecture, and doctrine in the sense that it feels like a sort of a description of how it should be and how it ought to be, and in fact, at the same time, I'm very aware that I've used the words "it should" or "it needs to" in this presentation. And so if I look at more sort of the ethical implications of architecture, then I really feel that strongly that we as architects need to address this. We can't look away. We need to take responsibilities, and that can be done in many different ways. And so I don't see it necessarily that there's only a single viewpoint in how that should be done.
Thank you. And we have the last written question from Chinmay Kamat. Again, I hope I
just maybe thinking about this a bit further.
Yes, please.
I think you can see that maybe also in the kind of approaches to our projects, right? You see that we actually almost chameleonize ourselves in many different ways and look at different lenses in projects, and also apply different strategies to projects, right? The doctrine of sort of the earth shelter that has become the sort of the optimum sustainable building type that some architects are looking at. We've employed that in a building like the Riparian House, but on the other hand, you know, these are buildings that are sort of underground rooted, are actually massively intervening in the earth, in the layers of the earth, in the topsoil. And then on the other hand, you have a project like this one here, or the Mumbai Artist Retreat, which is all about lightness and about creating temporality. And I think if there's any maybe doctrine that needs to be applied, is the doctrine of not having the doctrine.
Okay, thank you. In my mind, there were some types of architecture that use the concept of sustainability and explain every architectural gesture with these moral issues, and the final result fails. this is when in my mind comes an interaction between the moral issues that you have to address with your architectural capacities. May not be a doctrine, but it's something that it's not coming out from the need for sustainability or moral issues itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm going to the last question from Chinmay Kamat. Practicing in Mumbai, you must be aware about the SRA schemes here and how government is just constructing high-rise buildings as a solution. But do you think it is an ideal solution though? Do you think horizontal development in this case would make much more sense than vertical development? Something like what the architect Doshi Sir has done in Aranya housing project. Do you think deployable architecture can be a solution for slum rehabilitation? Something like one of your projects in Aurangabad, the one you showed in the presentation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I maybe have to place this in a bit more context. I had shared an image of an SRA scheme, which is the project where you had these narrow building slabs, 3 meter space in between these narrow gaps for ventilation at the most, not really functioning as such, but those are SRA schemes, right? And those are the kind of buildings that are built by the government to actually, on one hand, to say we can remove slums. Slums are not good; they're not hygienic. They are an eyesore. They are bringing the image down of a city like Mumbai as a sort of a world-class city. So they need to be eradicated, right? And then what actually happens in reality is that you get this kind of housing construction with this high-rise, which is a permanent construction, unlike maybe the slum housing, which is sort of semi-permanent. It's made out of concrete, but at the same time, the life quality of life does not really improve. And what actually happens, it's become more of a real estate enterprise, an annex between the government and certain developers that not only build these SRA schemes, but on the same plot they are also allowed to build housing for the market to sort of refinance this redevelopment, right? And this market housing actually often gets the best location on the site. It gets the best land, the most amount of land, and gets the best facilities. So there are really two double standards between what we think is right for one class of society and what we think is right for another class of society. And what happens then is that you actually start creating this sort of schism in architecture, in build work, in something that will last at least 30 years or more, right? And one problem here is that this is, of course, in a city in Mumbai, which has an extremely high density, right? It is one of the most dense cities of the world. And therefore, you need to think of, when you develop the city, you need to think of high-rise development, at least in the center part. But what happens is that this model then becomes a sort of the default model for any other kind of housing project as well. So even if you're in less dense situations in smaller towns in India, you get the same type of building constructed. And I think that's where maybe projects like you mentioned, deployable architecture or temporary architecture can be of significance, even if it's just for the simple reason that housing that is built for the poor has an extremely limited size. You know, to tell you the minimum size, which is then therefore the default size of a housing unit, is 30 square meters. And in 30 square meters, an entire family needs to live. 5 people, but it can be more people as well. So this is not something that people can live in for a very long time. It is a good starting point, but at some point it needs to be able to grow. And therefore horizontal schemes have more possibilities because they allow horizontal growth to accommodate these changes in family situations.
Thank you. And we have one final question. I invite Cristi Borcan to ask it. He asked us to speak the question.
Yeah,
Cristi?
thanks. Thank you. Because we are at a university event, I wanted to ask you a question about education. And I want to relate my question to an event that is happening these days in Romania. There is a Biennale in a city in Romania, Timișoara, Beta Biennale, and I think one of the curators, it's online. She's online. I want to relate the question to the Biennale's theme, because the theme of this Biennale is, the title, it's Enough is Enough. And they put a very, a very strange and at the same time very scary question for us architects. It's an architectural Biennale, right? So they put this question in the beginning of their statement. Do we really have to build? So it's a very scary question, of course, for us architects and of course for the students that are part of these conversations, because they prepare, they prepare for building, yeah. And one of the best biennales in the last years in the region is asking this question: do we really have to build? And I want to ask, and I wanted to make this connection because you said at the beginning something about your education in Rotterdam, I think it was, or in Utrecht,
Delft, yeah.
in
Delft.
Holland,
Yeah.
in the Netherlands, and you said that you were somehow not very satisfied, and when you went to India, something completely changed your way of looking, yeah, of the how you look at things. Maybe it's not wrong, it's something different, yeah, not satisfied, something different. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think about do you think it's something wrong with the Western, let's say general Western type of architectural education, or if you feel that something is wrong, and if you do feel this way, what do you think can be improved? What can we do as pedagogues of architecture? I don't know. I don't know if you teach also. I don't.
No, I don't. But of course, this question, enough is enough, and should we build? Is that the question?
Do we really have to build?
Do we really
It's
have to build?
it's
yeah.
like.
This is also asked in a particular context in Romania, right? So I don't have the context. Maybe the curator can speak about it if she's here or she is here. So or maybe you can clarify that a bit.
Yeah, but no, I wanted just to make a connection with this event, but my question is quite simple for you. In the Western type of architectural education, do we have to change something, or what should we change?
Yes. Well, I do think from sort of my experience speaking, right? I indeed studied in Delft in the Netherlands, and for us, architecture seemed to be a sort of a profession which was all about sort of individual expression. I think what sort of changed for me in India was the sense that there were much larger problems to really address, and of course, India itself is a country where you just look around everywhere and you can see problems. You can also see wonderful things, and you often do, but it seemed to me very obvious of what you could actually contribute, and that is maybe very different from sort of this enough is enough phrase. Maybe you can clarify that still a little bit more.
Yes, or maybe, Christy, we can continue this chat. I mean, Robert, we will have the opportunity to meet at the final jury.
Yeah.
And maybe it's true that this is a local question, even though it has a general interest. So
I'm really interested to know more about it.
Yes. Christy,
okay, but we can send you some details, and we continue maybe during the session.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you very much, Robert, for today and for the beautiful presentation. I want to thank everybody who has attended this lecture and also has asked questions. And we will meet again with Robert and Ryan and Nevan in 5 weeks from now. And next Wednesday we'll have the final lecture from from our studio, from this series with Professor Nevan Fuchs from Oslo University. And have a great day, and keep talking architecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
And see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.